trust is that lubricant that keeps everything flowing. I saw that the development of a leader was not as simple as a person understanding their personality. As they were sharing those things together, do you know what was happening? They were starting to trust each other.
Everything you said just really hits. Hello, and welcome to the Liberty Spenders podcast. We are Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, your hosts and co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's raised over $500 million and helped elect over 100 members of Congress, 14 governors. Whoops, I've lost counts. 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question. What if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into an engaged and lucrative audience that we call Liberty Spenders? Now, they are politically conservative or faith-based consumers, and they're looking to buy from businesses and brands that align with their values.
Our guest today is Dr. Rob McKenna. He's the CEO and founder of Wild Leaders, creator of the Wild Toolkit, president of the Wild Foundation. He's a renowned expert in leadership development, celebrated for his groundbreaking work in fostering trust, driving performance, and connecting business strategy with the human side of leadership. And I thought it was cool, ranked among the top 30 most influential IO psychologists alive today. And I'm going to have to ask, what's an IO psychologist?
Are we asking that question right out of the gate, Kurt?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Because I'm super curious.
And by the way, I haven't said this for a while, but when that rating came out, I was among the top 30 alive today. And my brother, who is a mentor of mine in this field, he called me immediately and he goes, "You do know that 2 of those people are dead, right?" So it was like, yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. If you have an older brother to keep you humble, that certainly helps out, So,
yeah.
But I described industrial organizational psychology as I've described it over the years because I not only became one, but I spent a couple of decades investing in the education of other PhDs in this field. I would always tell them that IO psychology is one of the most powerful guilds in corporate America that most people have never heard of. And one of the reasons is that the bread and butter of our field for a long time, actually post World War II, has been in the areas of selection and performance management. And so people with expertise in psychology, specifically related to organizational functioning and leadership and selection, been the people who have been in charge of the systems that make the decisions about who gets in the door and what gets rewarded. And so when you have that kind of influence, I told students, as they were going out into the field to work in large corporations or medium-sized businesses, that they're going to be in really important roles. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, absolutely. And I know that your most recent obsession has been the importance of trust and why a business should be looking at measuring trust within the organization. And on one hand, that seems super obvious, right? We need to trust each other to be effective. But I also thought in some ways it feels like even the definition of trust might be difficult to understand. So I thought we'd start with that. When you say trust is important in a business, in an organization, what do you mean by trust?
Okay. So it has become over the last few years a very, very important part of our work. I could also tell you a little bit of the backstory of how we got there, but let me launch out with that definition that you asked for, is that trust is your belief in my integrity, in my ability, in my reliability, in my strength, and your belief that I will tell you the truth if any of those things are lacking. And so what I mean by that is when I say that, it's more complex than just trust. Is not just we throw this word around all the time, but I think the definition is important because it calls out what we're really talking about. You don't get trust or understand trust simply by throwing the word around. We have to think about what are the things, the factors, and the drivers that actually make it occur between people. And so with that definition, some of the important pieces of that, one is that I said, trust is your belief in these things in me, which means it is inherently relational. It is between people is where that occurs. And sometimes it's between people and things. I think you can apply that definition to people and certain kinds of things that we trust as well. But when you think about integrity, that's your belief that I'll actually do what you're asking me to do, and I'll do it with your best interest at heart. The ability part is that I can do it, which is a critical part of trust. If I can't do it, then that's a problem. Reliability is whether I'll do it consistently, because consistency plays a role in trust. When something is consistently not happening, we start to lose trust. And then strength is different than ability, because strength is this understanding that you actually could do it well or that you could improve. And then finally, sort of the foundation of all of that is that we will be honest with each other, where we will actually tell each other the truth when any of those things are lacking, which involves a lot of transparency and all the other pieces of that puzzle. And what we say at Wild Leaders is that that's a lot for a person to live into and to understand. And so we have to understand these things about each other to live into that definition, to actually make it come alive. We have to understand a lot about each other, which also by default means that we have to understand a lot about ourselves, because it's difficult. We have to know each other, but how can we know each other if we don't know ourselves, which has been the foundation of a lot of Wild Leaders' work over the years.
Well, I just love that definition. And I think everything you said just really hits as you were going through that slowly of breaking it down. Because again, when this airs, it will have not been very long since the most recent election. And there's been talk for so long about the public's loss of trust. And I know from reading all kinds of research from Harvard Business Review and others, of course, that's felt across the gamut, right? From employees, employee culture at the workplace, major institutions, government. And so this work and this emphasis that you're doing, I think, again, is so important and so timely. And also why I'm really thrilled to be chatting with you about this today and what you're working on. Because again, without that trust and without people understanding what it means and having an agreement, even on the definition, to your point, how else can you build it if there's not some agreement on a foundational level of what it means to earn that trust? So I love your definition of it. It's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And certainly as a leader, as I was reading more about this and thinking about it, I know you have a method to measure it. And my thought process on that was, as somebody who's run a business for 20 years, I can certainly again see at times where, I felt like there was a great trust within our employees, maybe because Chris and I remember during COVID, a lot of our employees were very complimentary. We were very transparent about the challenges that we were going through as a business, even if it was bad news. And there was a lot of good feedback on that. And but I also feel like trust kind of comes and goes sometimes, maybe based both on factors at our company, things that we're doing right, or ways that Chris and I are doing right, but maybe also on what is happening in an employee's life, which may have nothing to do with the business. And so I'm kind of curious about this idea of measuring trust, how you measure something like that, something that, certainly some people would say, well, that's just a feeling, right? How do you get into that and put it on a piece of paper and say, okay, we're doing good in this trust area, or we're not,
Yeah. It's to both of your comments. We throw this word around, and I'm a person, words matter to me a lot. It's even in the brand of Wild Leaders, because there's two meanings in that. Our brand promise is whole and intentional leader development is what the brand promise is. That's what the acronym stands for. But at the same time, it came from my deep conviction that every person, every leader we work with, every employee has a wild story. And it makes me think about when we use the term wild, we say like, oh, that was wild. It usually is something that's surprising. It has like this benefit, but it's kind of caught us off guard. But it was important. And I think the same thing is with trust, is that we throw this word around. You start to study trust over the years and you realize how often people use the word. I hear it all the time. I hear it in songs I listen to. You hear it in political conversations. You hear it in every organization. There's a talk of it. But we do talk about it in kind of an ambiguous way, as if it is simply a feeling. And I would love to invite your listeners into a little journey, because I think about this all the time. I as a leader of my own organization, is this something I have to think about continually? And you have to think about your need for trust to do anything. The trust that you need to even feel to have an important conversation with your spouse, or the trust you need to feel to even drive down the road. When next time you get in your car, and believe that oncoming drivers will have the ability to stay on their side of the road. The trust you have to feel to take even $1 to a local store. I really dated myself just now. Who takes $1, right? But it's like, but the trust you have to feel that you could actually do that, or the trust, we work with a lot of security folks in the security industry. The trust you have to feel to even walk into a coffee shop, that you'll be safe when you do that. And the trust you have to feel when you send an important message or a text to a team member, that they actually won't, politicize that text or somehow use it against you or not respond to it. In the trust that customers have to feel to buy anything that we sell. It is when it's there, it is the lubricant that makes everything else work. And when it's missing, it's the thing. I think of engines, and my team members, some of whom are like, we're not into cars. I've always been into cars and trucks. And so it's like oil in an engine. An engine without oil will seize. And we watch that happening all the time. That trust is that lubricant that keeps everything flowing. But to your point about the definition and then this measurement of it, is that we talk about it as if it's a feeling. And Boston wrote a song about this. For those of us who remember, right. It's more than a feeling. That trust is more. That it's actually, what's interesting about trust is that it is more than belief. And belief and faith are absolutely critical. But if you think about it this way, some of us have done trust falls historically, where you fall into the arms of your team members.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I've done that.
And it's interesting, right? Because if Kristen and I are on the same team together, I can believe that Kristen will catch me if we did a trust fall. If I trust Kristen, I will actually fall. And so trust in many ways is faith and belief with teeth. It's the manifestation of that. And so to that end, also, it makes it really important that that trust, just like oxygen, has a chemistry. I mean, even something like loneliness is this feeling we have, but loneliness has a chemistry also. Right. There are things that make up whether or not I feel lonely or not, that we wouldn't use the term lonely to describe them. Do I have friends I can call for certain reasons in certain seasons of my life? Is a big part of that. So trust is the same way. And so when you look at there's so much incredible research for decades on things like trust, organizational performance, what it means to have an engaged workforce, all these pieces of the puzzle. And you start to apply that to a concept of trust, and you realize that it has things that we can measure that are a part of it. And so when we created what's called the Wild Trust Index, and we provide to organizations what's called a net trust score, so that they can actually begin to assess. And a couple of weeks ago, I went and spoke to, it was like 40 of these CEOs, and they're in the room, and there was this one guy who probably the most powerful person in the room. He runs a business that's got at least $1 billion in revenue, and he's sitting there and he's looking at me cross-eyed all day. These kind of moments where you're like, I felt like I was getting through to like 90% of the people in the room talking about trust. And he's looking at me and I'm like, I do not know what he's thinking right now. And after I left, I was out in the parking lot, getting into my rental car, and he came up to me and he said, Rob, he said, thank you for today. He said, it never occurred to me that I could measure trust. And the reason why that was so critical, and measuring it means understanding its chemistry. Like, what are the variables and the drivers? That's what we built this index around, that would allow me to assess. Because if I'm going to measure, and I have to measure, if I don't measure, it's like, I always say, if we don't measure, it's like going to a mall. Remember when we used to go to malls? Like some of us used to go do that. So, and the first thing you do if it's a new mall, and I still do this, when I'm on the road, sometimes I'll go for a run and I'll see like an outdoor mall. I did this a couple weeks ago. You look for the directory, right? Let's say you know where you want to go. Let's say there's a store that I know that I want to go to. So I see that on the map. But what's the next thing we all look for? We look for those 3 little words. You are here, which I think is a great just emphasis on the importance of assessment and measurement. It's not like, don't do it for the sake of like turning people into robots, but we have to assess where we are in order to understand where we want to go. And so we created this index, and it provides a net trust score at 3 different levels, which we could talk more about. But there are drivers of trust at the personal level, things that I must be developing and understand about myself as a person or a leader. There are things at the team level, at that relational level, which is where that definition I described sits, Kristen. And then there are also things structurally that we know are predictive of trust building cultures as well at the organizational level that some people are surprised by. There's things structurally that we can do better.
So there was a lot to unpack there. And I wanted to go back to what something you had just said, and then we can go and talk more about this measurement, because I know that was what you were trying to get at, Kurt, was tell me again, how did you describe that? You said that trust was faith and belief with teeth. Is that what I heard you say?
That's what I said. Yeah. Yeah. It's, let me describe it a little different way. One of the things that is the oldest story in the research on leader development and team effectiveness and organizational effectiveness. And literally there is 100 years, almost a century of research on this. And if you listen to any leadership expert who is worth what you're paying them, there are two fundamental principles of leader and organizational effectiveness that have stood the test of time. And it's such a simple little piece of math. And the simple thing is that we have to provide really, really consistent and reliable structures and operational. That's why operations programs really work really well. If you have a strong operational system, we have to do what we describe at Wild Leaders as the visible things really well. So if we have those things, and money is a part of that, right? We have to have financing to do these kinds of things. We have to have a good product. We have to have, a strong mission statement that's documented. We have things that we can see, touch, and feel. We have a strong organizational structure and rhythms of our meetings and the way that we do the business and so on. At the very same time, what that research has told us is that there is what we describe as an invisible part of the equation that is just as, if not more important. And it's why when I ask CEOs, like, if you could go back and study two things, what would they be? Most of them say consistently, I'd study either finance or accounting, right? So I'd study that business side, and I'd study psychology. Because they say most of what I'm dealing with is people issues and, budget issues or structural operational kinds of issues. And I say that because when you think about trust in so many ways is the bridge between those two things. And it's one thing, and like faith and belief, this deep belief in the things I can't prove is really important. But that's the foundation. If I begin to trust you, I will actually interact with you and interact with those systems in a way, in a very different way. So what trust does is the bridge between those visible parts of our business and our work and our organizations, or our government, by the way, and the invisible portion that's going on until our world is run by robots. Those two things will always be critical. And so I describe it as faith and belief with teeth I'm not saying that it's more important than faith or belief. What I'm saying is that it's the actual manifestation. You can see it when it's there. And you have a different experience of your world when it's there.
So I love that. And I wanted to go back because I thought that was just such a powerful way you described it. So I'm glad you went into that more. It was a great little hook, and I wanted to dive into that. So you kind of were already leading into this, but from what you know, what do you see? What are the consequences that you would describe to people as what happens when there's a lack of trust, both in a business and maybe in the overall economy? We've already talked about the macro feeling of a loss of trust. So what are the consequences of that?
Oh my goodness. So one of the things that we assess is we have this matrix of trust that we provide to organizations. And I tell you that because it's a simple 2x2. But if you would imagine that you were able to assess organizational level trust and then also team level trust. So let's say that we could understand the extent to which teams within an organization, that relational part was either strong or not on one axis. Mm-hmm. And then on the other axis, you have whether or not they sort of believe that the organization itself, is there trust at that level, at the level, and we describe a high organizational trust as a shell of trust. So it's important because it means that it's like an egg. This outer shell is strong. We have strong operational structures. We have strong job descriptions. People know what they're accountable for. People have development plans in place. There's that's occurring. But maybe on the inside, it's a little messy, right? And the other possibility is that you have really strong team trust and that people are within more siloed moments are trusting each other in their teams, but they're not feeling that sense of alignment and trust in the larger organization or their leaders. And I tell you that, Kristen, to your comment, because what we have seen in our we're publishing a state of trust benchmark study in early 2025. And what we're seeing that kind of shocked me a bit was that half of the organizations in our sample, and it's across all kinds of industries, nearly half of the people are functioning with what we call, it's the low category, the jungle. We call it the jungle of trust. And on the high category, we describe this is the goal, this is the stronghold of trust. And when I look at that data, it to your question, it breaks my heart, quite honestly. And I don't know about the two of you, but I've been there. I've worked in a situation like this where team trust, I didn't know who could trust on my team, which is what is really happening all the day. You talk to an executive, a multi-billion-dollar who's in charge for multi-billions of dollars in revenue. You know what they talk about mostly is whether or not they trust the other executives on their team. You know what? It's like they spend as much time on that. And so this isn't a level of analysis question, but the other thing that they don't have then is they don't trust their leaders, they don't trust their organization. And when we're functioning in that way, what it does is it increases what psychologists describe. There's actually a term for it, emotional labor. And what it increases is the amount of time that I'm having to spend on managing just unhealthy relationships and toxicity, as opposed to making real progress on the visible things. Do you see what I mean? So, and what it does is we could go into all the kinds of specific causes it occurs, but it breaks down not only performance, but the well-being of people and rots them from the inside out. Now, I don't want to, and I hope you hear also that I'm not a person who would say that we're all victims of this. So it's not that, it's saying that there are things that we have to do as well as what our organization could do that could increase it.
Well, I definitely agree with that. And we are, Kurt and I have been passionate about that. We wouldn't have probably described it as just the trust, but a healthy culture, we would have said. And I've invested a lot in that over the years with our team, and even in how we function with the leadership team, and what's our governing philosophy that helps provide accountability and that trust so that people can speak freely, to know that there's not going to be any, fear of recourse, because those things are essential. When people aren't, again, especially at the leadership level, when they're not free to give contradictory thoughts or to challenge the direction of even, again, the top executives or Kurt and I, it creates all kinds of problems, right? You get your blinders on. You're not all rowing in the same direction. You don't have full buy-in. Pat Lencioni talks about this a lot, with the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And so everything you're saying, it's just, and again, any business owner would absolutely can understand this, and really any employee, because like you said, we see this in the workplace, and we often don't know entirely how to fix it, or we don't know what's our part in it. And so I love what you just said too, because there's expectation from the top of how you can set up a healthy environment for that. But each individual person has to do their part. To control their own mindset, to not read into things that people are doing, to give everybody a fair chance. And so, it's spot on. And again, such an important topic.
It's one of the things that I find compelling is that we didn't start with trust. So we didn't back our way into it trying to figure out what the drivers were, because it's like you don't achieve trust by talking about it.
It's so important that you said that. There's so many of us that, let's have a talk about it, right? Let's have a staff meeting and tell everybody how important this is.
Yeah. And it's like an open door policy doesn't actually create communication. Telling people that you have an open door policy doesn't make that happen. So it's a deep look at what change actually looks like, and saying, and a willingness to edit and to learn that starts with at the highest levels of organization. Like, we rarely will work with an organization with a senior leader who's not willing to edit. And it's because they're probably going to be as much of the issue as anybody else. But it's interesting that the way that we actually got to trust was my heart, and I will always be a whole and intentional leader development person. That's what I set out to do. I wanted to take the body of research on there, what we actually know about what it means to develop the capacity of a person and a leader, and increase team effectiveness and organizational effectiveness. So that's what I built products for, built an entire SaaS system for. I was deeply for the last 20 years, that's what I've given my life to, because I saw that the development of a leader was not as simple as a person understanding their personality. It's a part of it, but it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as their behavior styles. It's not as simple as what their strengths are, what they're good at. All those are pieces of the puzzle. And so you look at what I set out to do is develop a whole person. And based on that research, what do we know about means to develop that capacity? And here's where trust came up was as we were doing that work and investing deeply in organizations developing their leaders and also the effectiveness of their team. So these people were bringing their awareness of their competencies, of their levels of support, of the experiences they needed to have next to move into their next leadership role, of their calling and purpose. As they were sharing those things together, do you know what was happening? They were starting to trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
So what it was we were just applying this body of research to the life and experience of a person and then teams and then whole organizations. And what was happening was they were starting to trust each other, probably because they were starting to know each other. But what's also cool is that it because we were doing assessment at the same time, it gave them an understanding. Because it's one thing to say, like, we're going to build trust. What Wild Leaders does is measures it, and then we go build it with you. Because it's that process of actually focusing on where do we have levers we could pull to deepen whole and sustaining trust across our organization for the long haul. And so I get excited to tell that story because it's like, we didn't back into it. It was like, it worked to do it that way. And so it's exciting to me to partner with other organizations that are doing that as well.
Yeah, well, I think you alluded to this earlier, and I think now's as good a time as ever to talk a little bit about how you got here. We have to pay a little special attention to your history, particularly as it pertains to spending some time in Wilmore, Kentucky, the home of the lovely Kristen for 15 years of her life before she came to Indiana and go to college. But tell us how all this developed over time. I know you've worked at colleges, you've taught, you've got your consulting business. How did all this come together?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Kurt. Kristen, that connection just kind of blew me away when I found out that we went to the same high school. Very strange. And I moved to Wilmore, Kentucky from Seattle. I was living in metropolitan Seattle. And so I remember getting into this little town, and it's just a very different world where I went from riding the public transportation bus as an 8th grader to living in Wilmore.
Population of, I don't know.
At the time, maybe
it's a couple
3,000 at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say a few thousand, three. Yeah.
Yeah.
So forget the same high school. It's Wilmore, Kentucky. Shout out to Wilmore, Kentucky. That's even a smaller world.
Yeah. And it's so how I got there, and the reason why that's important as a part of my own journey, I think I grew up as the son of a university president and then a seminary president. So my dad went to Asbury Theological Seminary to be the president when I was starting 9th grade. And I say that because growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was a time in history where leaders really did not have very many places where they could actually develop safely. And I think in many ways I've described our dinner table conversations as sort of an advisory board session, not because I was bringing wisdom as a 9th grader, but because, my folks were dealing with very real leadership challenges. People don't know that if you're a college or a seminary president and someone sues the university, it feels like they're suing you because in essence they are. Like, you are the target. And so, and it was difficult. It's difficult to be in those leadership roles. It still is because it's not okay to be vulnerable. It's not okay to be learning, and yet you have to be.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's sort of, I think it started there as I experienced that as a child and said, what if I could, and we had a CEO a few years ago say to me who understood my mission and the mission of Wild Leaders. And he said, so Rob, you've tried to create that dinner table for as many leaders as possible. Is that what you've done? And I said, I think that's a great description. But I would also say this, that I got a chance in my 30s to be a part of multiple longitudinal, and I mean by that long-term studies where we followed leaders for multiple years in a variety of different studies. And what I started to see was that journey of a leader and what that dinner table conversation needed to look like was multifaceted, as I've already said. It didn't involve just one thing. And any person who's in a leadership role, unless they're really wanting to just oversimplify everything, knows that it's going to be more than their competence that's going to play a role in their effectiveness. And so it really set the stage for me to begin to develop systems because I didn't want to go just speak about things like trust or things like leader development. I wanted to provide people a pathway to get intentional about it based on the best research in the world that we could find and put together. And so that's what I did. The other part of it I don't know if this is interesting to people or not, but I am a person in his 50s who can still beat up on most 12-year-olds at Call of Duty. And I say that because I actually, when gaming platforms went online, I got inspired by the way that gaming platforms tracked metrics for developing your gaming skills. And
interesting. We're not
so
gamers ourselves, so I can't speak from experience. You'll have to educate us.
Why my wife says that, Kristen, I don't know. My wife says that, but she plays a lot of those card games on her phone, which is actually some of the same inspiration is there. It's the metrics that kind of motivate you to try to do a little bit better. And so I started getting inspired. Imagine this guy who's this integrator saying like, oh man, technology is taking off where I could build a process that could increase trust in teams, that we could assess it, we could provide metrics that would speak into their life and their organization, and then it could inspire deep and sustaining change. And so it's like, that's more than you may have asked for with the Wilmore story, Kurt, but that's where it came from.
Well, it all feeds into what drives you. And I think for, any business leader who's listening, those are the kinds of things that added color, because we all have those aha moments, or what is it that made us decide to focus on whatever it is we're focusing on. And I find that fascinating. And again, you've hit it on, it can be an ambiguous topic. And so without some kind of concrete framework for people, that's the biggest hangup for any type of major change you're trying to make is, well, how do I get started? What are the next steps? Where's point A? And how do I go from point A to point B? And so on. And so again, that's why this is so critical. And why, again, it's so valuable for our listeners to hear this, because it doesn't matter, again, what else you've got going on. You're going to hit your sales targets. You're going to focus on your marketing. But again, without that glue, not only within the team, but within your customers, these things aren't sustainable. You're going to see cracks.
Yeah. Well, that was something I got curious about as you've been talking about this. So the ability to measure and affect the company culture and how employees trust each other, is fascinating. How do we measure? Can we measure? Are you measuring? Do our customers trust us? Because that started to really impact me as you were talking about it. Because I was thinking, in effect, that's what I'm doing when I'm out sitting across from a potential prospect, presenting to them our offer, that they need to know, like, and trust us. And as you listed off the things that, define trust, do you have the ability to do it? Do you, all of those things, I think, probably impact the buying decision as much as it does the employee's decision about whether or not they trust their coworkers. Maybe harder to measure, right? If you have to, you're surveying customers. But how do we dive into that, if at all?
Well, and really quick before I let you answer that, I think just to tie that connection is the fundamentals of this you can take, even if there's not, and you'll get a chance to speak to this, even if there's not a way to concretely measure it the same way you could within your organization. When you can appreciate the fundamentals, this is ultimately what we're talking about with Liberty Spenders and helping people pivot and market to this audience in a way that is authentic and true, that they believe is real. And so all of these things play in, because again, you can have marketing, but they have to believe, again, that you're going to deliver, right, a quality product with consistency, and all of those things play in. So now I'll give you a chance to answer the question.
Yeah. I would say we are not in the customer trust business, and we have partners who are. I would say this, that it's an important indicator, but it does little to actually begin to build trust. But it's an important assessment point. So we assess it, that we do measure it, but we measure it from your team's standpoint. How do their perceptions of that trust with your stakeholders on the outside? What's interesting is that the key drivers of trust are primarily occurring at the individual level. So what actually drives that customer trust is connected to whether or not teams are truthful with each other. Individual, are you developing the capacity of your people so that they actually can go into conversations together with some awareness of where it is they're having to do some work, but also where their strength is. And we're seeing this all the time related to that level of customer trust as these key drivers, because you see it break. It's that feeling. It's back to that feeling thing. You see it like, why is this occurring when I called up this plumbing company? We were, during the pandemic, we ended up working with a lot of plumbing companies. It was the weirdest thing, you guys. It was we were working with. I did corporate work for years, and then all of a sudden, guess who needs a lot of water? Everybody. Right. Like farming equipment companies became a huge client base for us, and places that were growing like crazy had to develop leader capacity. But what we saw is that their customer trust would break down because you had a sales team that was estimating on jobs, not communicating well, and understanding each other well, and developing actually that relational sort of, that lubricant in their relationship that would help it go well. And then all of a sudden the customer trust breaks down because they're seeing weird behaviors when that transition from I estimated your job and now the crew's here to actually fix it. And it's just, it's going weird. And the customer has no visibility on why, but it's fundamentally a trust issue.
Well, I want to return back to some of the stuff you're doing on trust, but I know you published a book recently. I think you got another one coming out too, but
yeah,
I thought the topic of the other book was also really good about, for leaders. So I thought I'd have you dig into that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Composed, The Heart and Science of Leading Under Pressure. And frankly, I think that most of us write books about things that we are working on in ourselves. And I think I'm someone who's experienced the necessity for being composed under pressure and really wanted to not just say, I got to be more composed. I got to stand better under conflict or in the storm or in adversity, but because I thought I want to know how. So we spent a lot of time doing research, multiple years, following leaders and studying what it is that allowed them to remain composed. I describe it as to stand well, to be anchored in the storm. And but also to understand what's going on in that. And it relates directly to trust, because the fundamental principle behind my book and the research of others is that a leader has to do at least one of two things really well to stand well in the storm. And the problem with these two things I would describe to you is that they're a little bit in tension with each other. So we need leaders who are both clear and convicted. They bring a sense of who they are. They communicate direction and a path forward with clarity and conviction. And at the very same time, they have a capacity to listen to the convictions of others. Are you with me? It's not enough. Like the best leader is someone who brings that level of clarity. We know where they stand. And at the very same moment has this strange ability to actually listen to others and to feel what they feel. And so in the book, I unpack this, and it's like, and I describe them as peacekeepers and truth speakers. But here's the challenge, is that we have to do both. And every one of us has a default. And what I mean by a default is the way that we respond out of compulsion when we're pushed into these high pressure moments. And so the challenge is to see the default as this is a strength. So I'd either do one side or the other quite well. Some people are much higher on conviction and that clarity and provide that. Other folks are much better at the connective side, and they're able to sort of naturally connect to what other people are thinking, needing, and feeling. And so what the book has been about, and our research over and over and over again, was help people understand. And we created an assessment called the Leading Under Pressure Inventory that helps you assess this. Am I more of a truth speaker or a peacekeeper? And where could I develop on the other side? But that wasn't all. What most of the book was what we studied was, what is it that allows people to do those two things at once? Mm-hmm. What is it that allows a person, a leader, or a person, whether you're in a family or in a business, to be both clear and convicted and also connected and listening? And so the book unpacks, there's 11 chapters on the 11 strategies that have allowed leaders to do that well and to identify where are you strong on those strategies and where we could do some work to actually increase that. And when you think about trust, think about this for a second. I mean, the problem with the overly convicted leader is people don't trust them because it's not a relationship. It's like they just, we hear their voices, but there's no listening. But the other person who's really connected, maybe they're full of empathy and compassion. The problem I tell them is that you can't keep everyone happy without lying to somebody. And then trust breaks down, right? So So this whole book is about, and it's a short little read. The best compliment I got about it, Kurt, was they said, "Hey, are you Dr. Rob?" That's what people often call me. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I just read your book on an airplane and I don't read." But it was, it's a book that I hope has helped many people just to be composed, to be able to stand well in the storm for their own sake, but for the sake of other people that they lead.
Well, let me tell you, I have not read it yet, but I will be picking up a copy because that sounds like something we could all benefit from. And anybody, I mean, my team, I don't want to break this down into gender stereotypes, but I can just tell you, between the two of us, we are on different sides of that, which has served us well because we complement each other in that way.
Yeah.
But I would also say, a book is only as good if someone picks it up and reads it. So being concise and able to get through it in a quick fashion, I would say, is kudos to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah. Well, that's the hardest thing to do.
It's hard to be brief. Brevity is.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It's hard.
It's a skill.
It is.
It takes more time, oddly. I actually sat in a couple weeks ago with your team as you talked about this index you're building. I think it was called the State of Trust Benchmark Study that you're going to be publishing, better word, in early 2025. So tell us about that project. What's that benchmark study going to give somebody who gets a chance to read it? I know it's got you excited. So tell us more.
It has. So the Wild Trust Index is our primary assessment. It's kind of that, it's the first thing that we assess when we start to work with an organization. After we do a discovery process, one of the core parts of Wild Leaders' brand promise is understanding the moment that you are attempting to seize as an organization. And I think it's really critical that we understand that context first. And we actually, it's very difficult to implement any kind of change process in an organization that has not worked through identifying what is the strategic moment they're facing. Because people development has to be connected to what's happening on the job. And so that's the first part of that. But then we come in and we assess trust. And so we've been, the cool thing, and something you saw, was we're able to provide this feedback and this net trust score across the personal, the team, the organizational level to each of these organizations, and assess where they fall in that matrix that I described, and identify some of the levers they could pull. But the other goal is that because we've been using this index, and after we built it, and all of the data that's been gathered, is like we're learning a lot about trust. So we have some early findings, and my team may slap me on the wrist for releasing some of this. And these are preliminary, but there are some interesting things that's occurring in the data. Yeah. And some of the things won't be surprising, but it's important to listen to it. One thing I already mentioned was I was surprised that nearly half of the sample is functioning within the jungle of trust. And so I mentioned that before, but I think that's something to listen to, because when I look at the data, I see people, and it hurts to imagine the reality that they're facing, and that they may actually be able to do something about it for themselves, as they begin to build a sense of what they can impact and control for themselves, and I think that's important as well. But also what their organization could do for them and between team members. So that finding was I was compelled by. I got to tell you. I'll also tell you more specifically, when you look at the data, that most of those organizations and people are right at the edge. So if you imagine a 2x2, they're kind of sitting in the top right of that bottom left quadrant. And the reason why that gives me hope is that there are just a few levers. I keep saying that, but it's important to see it that way. There are a few levers that they could pull in those organizations to actually move people toward the stronghold. The second thing that is so interesting, I don't know if you knew this, but somewhere between 66 and 88%, this is from other research, and then I'll get to ours, 66 and 88% of the people believe they're above average.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. Aren't we all just blind to because we know our own intentions. And so that does not surprise me at all.
Yeah. The math doesn't work, right? And so
that math ain't mathin'.
Yeah. One of the questions in the personal trust area that we know is critical for developing this capacity within myself to become trustworthy is the extent to which, there's two sides of this, the extent to which I'm invested in supporting others, and another driver, That's the extent to which I feel supported.
Mhm.
And so far in these preliminary results, do you know what one of the lowest rated areas is? Is the extent to which I feel supported.
Mhm.
Do you know what one of the highest areas is? The extent to which I feel like I'm supporting others.
Of course. Of course. We
So,
do so
so
much for other people. If only it would be
the math doesn't work
reciprocated.
though, right? It's like
Right.
if this were occurring across the organization, those should be equal, but there's something
Right.
going on in that. And so it's just an interesting point I think that we all realize. And I have a hypothesis and a theory about the organizations, because the organizations that we work with, when it comes to this personal level of awareness in the development of myself, is that in the first year, oftentimes those scores actually go down. And one of the reasons is that people really didn't know they didn't really realize what we were talking about. They're like, now I understand what competence is. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, and then it starts to build again. And so we do find that the personal trust scores are quite a bit higher than the team and organizational level trust scores. But I think that's an important starting place in some of the preliminary findings. One of the other things that I think is interesting in the data as well is the importance we have seen of clear job descriptions. And I have yet to meet a leader who does not want their team and team members to be increasingly accountable for their own results. And it is very difficult to be accountable for results that are not clear.
Right.
So to the extent that not only have a clear job description, but that's an effective assessment of what your job is actually a key driver of trust at the organization level.
Yeah.
So that's just a little peek.
I love that. Thank you for giving us that. I feel really honored that we got a little sneak peek exclusive here, a little tease of what you're going to release in a few months. But I have a theory too. I mean, you touched on this about self-awareness. But I'm also wondering, how much of that, even with the job description, because again, this is a challenge that we have had over years, and you can do your best to be clear, but most job descriptions are just that, and we all know they have the other duties as assigned, and they usually don't come with benchmarks, KPIs. What does success look like? So I guess my follow-up is it really the job description in terms of when somebody starts, or is it really more about how that is being executed and communicated on a regular basis, where you're constantly coming back to that, constantly coming back to, these are the priorities, this is how we're going to measure success? Because at least for my own entrepreneurial journey, that to me, I find is what takes even more intention beyond the initial description is, what does success look like? What am I expected to do that is going to mean I get my gold star, at my reviews and within my one-on-ones with my manager?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the way we assess it, I think, is kind of interesting. We do the same thing with development plans. So I've written a lot on development plans over the years, and I've written one of the most popular things that we ever produced for as far as a corporate download was a document called Development Plans That Aren't a Waste of Time. Right. And people loved it because everybody knows they feel like it's a waste of time. But when we assess, but development planning, having a plan for your learning and growth that is connected to your job is critical. So the way that we assess that is we don't just ask, do you have a development plan? But do you have a development plan that increases your performance and your well-being? And so assessing it that way, and the same thing with job descriptions. I absolutely agree with you. But so the job description should be something that is actually where the person in the job is having a voice into what that job description looks like, and that the job description is an accurate assessment of what the person actually has to do to be successful. And in so many cases, it's just a document that sits on the shelf. And so it's a continual conversation. It's the same thing with, we do corporate charter work for organizations because it's so important for organizations to make a statement about who they are, what they value in terms of what behaviors will look like, what people can expect from the organization, what the organization will expect of them. But I always tell the leaders we work with, do not put it in a glass case on the wall, please. Don't do that, because you just contained it in a glass case. Instead, it's a living and breathing document where if it's worthwhile, it's worth talking about at least every 6 months and saying, where does our corporate charter challenge you? And where does it excite you? Let's talk about this. Just like you were saying, Kristen.
Yeah, well, because you're right, and of course, I feel like in our business, and frankly, in the modern world, things change, and one day we're super busy with some big clients, And the priority is just client satisfaction, keep these clients happy, do good work for them. And then in the agency world, those clients rotate in and out. And now maybe the priority is generating sales, case studies, things that will help us get new clients. And so it creates that sort of feeling like, well, I understood what I was supposed to be doing 3 weeks ago. Now my job's a little different than it was, and I have a different set of priorities.
Well, I think that's just true in terms of the speed of development technology. We all know that, AI is changing a lot of things, the speed at which those types of things and technological advancements are going to affect every company, every industry. And so again, to your point, these things are fluid. You need to be nimble. You need to be keeping them updated and keeping them moving so that your company can keep moving forward and making progress and not being dated on, some format of the model that's no longer applicable. So like you said, it's a living, breathing document that you don't set it out once when you go to hire someone and then you don't look at it again. From the job description perspective, it's got to continually grow.
I hope one thing that folks hear is the this if I ask a person, I was with a CSO, chief security officer, last week, and I asked him, I said, what does trust have to do with the performance and well-being of your organization and your people right now? And he said, and this is what I hear every single time. You know what their one word response is? Everything.
Oh, good. I was hoping they weren't going to say nothing.
Everything. And the problem with everything is it is so, it's too big. Do you know what I mean? Because if it is everything, then we have to be intentional about getting to root causes. If it truly is that, and everybody knows that, how do we begin to tackle this? And this is where I think it's important that there are many thought leaders out there talking about trust, and that's important. I'm in the fight with them. But I would say that this is my hope, is that people would see, I could begin to measure this. I could assess it, and not in a way that would turn my people into robots, but where I could increase their performance and their well-being, where I could see them more effectively as I'm helping them perform better. Because every organization we deal with, these CEOs are not just interested in growth and 10xing their business. They want to leave a legacy for their people. And it begins with an actual addressing of those root causes, but you have to know where you are first. Yeah.
And again, for those people that are very metrics driven, revenue driven, goals driven, outcome driven, by the way, this helps you get there. And so investing in your people, there's plenty of people, I'm sure, that think, oh, this is foo-foo, or why are we going to talk about our feelings so much? Let's just focus on getting the job done. And of course, as we know, it doesn't work that way. And humans are complex individuals. And again, there's so much external stimulus that impacts people at work, and so many more people working remote, and the challenges of that. And so again, for your organization, you have your sales targets, you have your marketing plan, you have your operation, you have legal, you have all of these things put in place to help your business thrive. But again, if you don't have that trust and that intentional development of your people, that's going to hold you back from the excellence of what your company could achieve. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to have those blinders on so that you are not focusing on that human element that is needed to execute so that you can reach your business outcomes. Yeah. So this has been great. And I know we'll be excited to get to our rapid fire section.
Yeah. As we come to an end, we always like to do a little bit of a lightning round and do some a couple of quick questions and answers. And I like to start by inquiring, what in 60, 90 seconds do you want to leave behind? What's the legacy you want to leave behind with the work you're doing today?
Yeah, it's when I hear people, and this is happening so often, complaining about the lack of leadership options. There's you hear this all the time about, I felt like we needed a bigger bench. We needed a full bench. And I think what I would hope people would hear is that the possibilities on the horizon in the future, they lie within us now. That we have to start being intentional about our investment in developing leaders and not just putting people in a box too soon. Because the emerging generation, they're ready. There are those who are ready, and the ones who aren't ready yet, they'll find their time. And so that my hope when you ask that question is that we would, I say this, this is my manifesto more talk is when I get a chance to scream this from the mountaintops is that we would 10, 20 years from now, we would have a full bench of wisdom and leaders who are bringing conviction and care at the same time, who are bringing strategic forethought and an incredible sense of discernment to the table. And we could do a better job of that because we got to stop complaining about what we have and start seeing this starts within us right now.
Oh man. Amen.
Yes.
Keep preaching that.
Absolutely. I also love, this is a little off the wall, but I love to give people 60, 90 seconds on any topic. It's just it can't be wild leaders that's got your interest recently. Maybe it's a hobby, a spiritual insight, a sports team you're a big fan of, whatever has got your goat recently. Maybe
it's more Call of Duty. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to see what that is.
Well, I could go on that path because the new version did come out. So I do try to keep my elimination to death ratio above 1.0 so I can still say that I can beat up on most of your 12-year-olds at that game. So that's a metric people may not understand. What's caught my interest lately? Can I be completely ridiculous about my response?
Yeah.
I love it.
It's supposed to be kind of a fun question.
So my wife and I just adopted a rescue dog from rural Kentucky.
And
we live in Seattle, and so I felt like it was meant to be. And I cannot figure out yet. She was supposed to be potty trained, and she's not. We love her to death. Like, she's not going anywhere. Like, we're willing to put up with this. Normally we wouldn't if this dog was a troublemaker, but in other ways. But it's so funny when I think about, like, there's all these translations of, I know how to train leaders. I'm struggling with training this dog. So, because I can never catch her in the act. Do you know what I mean? So I'm trying to figure it out, get her a new habit. So that's where my focus is. That sounds just right now.
Well, thank you, Dr. McKenna, for joining. This has been a great episode. For those of you listening, if you'd like to have your organization take the Wild Trust Index and receive your net trust score, send an email to contact@wildleaders.org.
Yes. And thank you again. This has been such a treat. I'm so glad we were able to have you. And I hope, again, our leaders take advantage of that offer. For those of you tuning in, thanks for your time and attention. If you found some value in this episode, we want to ask you to like and subscribe. And also, if you want to learn more about how you can also engage this lucrative audience, you can get a chance to take a look at our new book, Liberty Spenders. It's a new bestseller, and you can get it for free on our website at libertyspenders.com/free. Until next time.